Hey everyone, this is Curb Knight, bringing you an update to my Lilfa deck post-Festival Booster 2023. So I guess a little bit of a background on the deck. Lilitha is a deck that is very much not good, and yet for some reason I insist on tormenting myself into trying to make it work. Though I think I described it last time as bad Bastion and bad Kyrie combined into one deck. Which definitely still holds true, but since that last deck profile, I've discovered a secret deck that makes the deck actually function. That one card carries the entire deck on her back, and we're going to be going over it today. And we did actually get quite a few good tools from this last festival booster. Most importantly, a relevant grade 3 that actually does something for the deck. So we're going to be seeing that in just a moment. Alright, so starting off, we are going to be opting to play the Lilfa ride line. Just in comparison to other ride lines, the ride line does decently well. It's not the greatest ride line, but it does enough for the deck to the point where I think it's better than Willista, although you could theoretically use Willista for the extra soul, but I think in this situation, Lilfa herself actually works pretty well because in conjunction with another card, it lets you ramp up your board a little bit faster. But since this is a deck that nobody knows, I guess we're going to have to go over the cards once again. So the grade 0 is just your generic D starter. You can play whatever you want. The grade 1, when she gets ridden over by the grade 2, you call a grade 2 or greater from your hand, and you call it to back row, center, rearguard. It gets boost until the end of turn, and then if you call the card, you do actually get to draw a card. So you do got a little bit of plus there just by calling something down. And then, of course, the grade 2, when she's rode upon by the grade 3, you choose one of your grade 2 or grade rearguards, and you can return it to the hand. So essentially what you're doing is you are riding it to grade 2, calling grade 2 or greater behind her, boosting with it to swing at the vanguard, and then next turn when you ride into your grade 3, you bounce the card that you called off of the ride line back to your hand, which is actually pretty good in conjunction with one of the cards, the main card that's holding the deck together. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and go over Lilfa herself. So she does have the skill, act once per turn, you can Soul Blast one, and all of your grade 2 or greater rearguards get boost until the end of turn. So that's kind of the game plan of the deck. You do actually have to have a full back row in order to do anything. So giving the back row, basically making all your grade 2s and 3s boosters, and then having them boost other things. So the second skill is at the end of the battle she attacks. If you have 3 or more grade 2 or greater rearguards in your back row, you can counterblast one, choose a rearguard from each your front and back row, return them hand, and then if you bounce 2 cards, you can choose a grade 3 card from your hand and call it to open rearguard circle. So she is basically somewhat Kyrie, where she's bouncing back a lot of cards, but she is also Bastion in the sense that you have to rely on grade 3 cards, and you actually can't use anything else. You can't call grade 2s, you can't call anything else. It has to be a grade 3, which is one of the biggest stumbling points of the deck, where everything is very reliant on that grade 3. So getting into the main deck, we are obviously playing the 3 copies of Persona Ride. This Persona Ride is actually pretty good because you can actually call down the Persona Ride, have it be a booster or an attacker, and then with Lilitha's skill, you can actually just bounce it to your hand. Let's say you call it off the top of the deck, you can actually just get it back and use it for your Persona Ride. So actually Persona Ride in this deck is not as difficult to reach as it is in other decks, but we do definitely want that Persona Ride, especially since we are going to be multi-attacking, having at least 4 attacks every single turn. Hopefully, theoretically the deck can actually reach 5 attacks if you're playing the double rare from the BT3, but we're not playing that because I don't think it's good enough right now, but I will talk about it a little bit later. Alright, so moving on to the main grade 3 of the deck, Lilitha's triple rare. This is, I said her name last time, Strayed or Stradle, whatever. So her skills when she's placed on rearguard from hand, notice only from hand, so you do have to call her from hand. If you're at grade 3, it gets plus 5k. And then if you place it during the main phase, you can Soul Blast 2 and draw a card. So I think I called her Calamity Tower on a grade 3 body last time, and she is still that. The only reason we are playing her is because she is an 18k body, and that is probably the best number that we can actually achieve, given this deck and its current potential. but it does hit 28 on Persona Ride, so it is still a very nice attacker, probably your best attacker in the deck. So moving on to the next grade 3 card, a new card from Festival Booster. That is going to be the 4 copies of our cycle card, our grade 3 cycle call, Adelheld. If you watched the last deck profile, which a couple of you actually did, you might have remembered me saying that there are literally 0 good grade 3 generics in Lyrical. And now that we actually have one, we are maxing out on it because it is actually a good card. And now we have a good grade 3 card to run in Lilfa. So she has a new card, so let's go ahead and go over her skills. So she has the generic, if your opponent's drive or damage check revealed a trigger this turn, it gets plus 10k and plus 10k shield. And then at the end of the battle, this attack while boosted, which is not going to be difficult to achieve in this deck whatsoever because all of your cards become boosters essentially. You Soul Blast 1, which is a little bit of a steep cost, especially if you're comboing her with this and using that Soul Blast 2, although sometimes you won't do that. But so you Soul Blast 1 and you perform all the followings. You either bounce the rear guard in the same column as it to the hand, or you can remove a trigger unit, over trigger from your drop, and then choose a unit card with less than or equal to your Vanguard from hand, and you call it to rear guard circle. So that first effect is mainly what we're using this. We're using this to bounce more cards, to add more cards to our hand, to make sure they can't get retired or attacked into, or to reuse on-play skills, which we do have a couple of in the deck, including Miss Stringe or whatever her name is. So we are able to reuse a lot of those on-play skills. She's very good in that sense. I don't really think we can use the over trigger from drop skill that effectively, because you would have to, I guess the best thing you would want to do is call over her to get a 5th attack if you're really there, if you really want to get to that point. But it's not great, but you could do it. I think in most cases you're just calling over here because it would be, you would have to overcall something because you're not bouncing enough cards at the right times in order to actually make this effective. Alright, so moving on, we do have 3 copies of Rakni. So this is a very simple card, grade 3, 13k body, and then during your turn, this unit cannot attack the Vanguard, and it gets a plus 10k. So this might be seeing, you might think, oh, this is a really bad card. It's a 23k attacker, but can only attack rears. Well, remember that Lilitha gives all grade 2 or greater rear guards boost. So this goes from a bad 23k attacker into a 23k booster. So this is really good to have in your back row. Only at 3 copies because it can be a brick, because this card is really only effective in the back row. If you ever have to move this thing up, that is so bad because you can only swing at rear guards. So mainly you want this in the back as a booster to make you hit really, really big numbers. Alright, next up, we do have a card that I believe I recommended during the last deck profile, but it is the 4 copies of Persis. So I've noticed that we do have a bit of a soul problem in the deck, and I do like playing this card, and she does actually help you make a pretty good number. So when she's placed on rear, if your Vanguard is Lilfa, you can soul charge 1 and it gets plus 2k. Do note that she is one of the few cards that doesn't need you to be on the grade 3 Lilfa, so if you call her while you're still on grade 2, which we're going to be talking about how we're going to do that in just a moment, you do actually get that skill. So she becomes a 15k attacker or booster, which does help you hit really good numbers, because if that's boosting an 18, that makes 28, or if she's attacking and boosted by a 13, that's 28, or if she's boosted by Miss 23k booster, that is 38. So very nice. The 2k is really annoying. Would have preferred it or like literally anything else, but you know, it's there, it serves utility. It's mainly there for soul charge. It means that we can actually use our soul skills, such as her and the new cycle card, without really caring too much, because do note that we do actually have to have 1 extra soul in order to make Lilitha's both of her skills online, because if we can't make them boost, then effectively we're just swinging unboosted, and that's just really bad. So she's here for that extra versatility. Very good. And you can also bounce her back. You can have her boost the Ghost Girl, bounce this back, and then basically refund the cost with it by placing her again and soul charging yet again. You can also bounce her with Lilitha. So very good card. Also another grade 3 that you can call out of Lilitha's skill. Alright, so last up we do have just one kind of little tech slot, one extra slot for a grade 3, and I'm opting to still play one copy of LV. I remember back in my last profile I said this was the least worst generic grade 3, and I still think that that holds through. So in the front row, all of your guys with different card names, and this unit can't be chosen by your opponent's card effects, and then if it hits a Vanguard you may counter charge 1. So we're mainly just being there because we this is like the 5th best grade 3. We did actually get a new card that supports Lilfa in Festival Booster, which is the Go-Go Street. So when she's placed by the ability of your Vanguard with Lilfa or Michu, so you do actually have to call her off of Lilfa's skill. So very restrictive. Soul Blast 2, you countercharge 1 and it gets 5k. So I don't really like this card. The countercharge is there if you want to go for a more counterblast focused build with the grade 2. I think maybe you play this in a conjunction with a lot more soul charge, because that soul blast 2 is pretty bad. You don't really need the counter charge because you're effectively using one counter blast per turn in this deck. You don't really use counter blast for anything else. But the fact that you have to Soul Blast 2 in order to get 5k is really bad, whereas the other grade 3 just gets it automatically, and then the Soul Blast 2 is only during main phase. I don't think this card is really worth playing in Lilfa or Michu at the moment, so we're just opting to play the LV. Alright, and lastly for the grade 3 cards, we are playing one copy of the Forbidal Surrogate. So this card is absolutely busted in the deck. I think this is the first time we're actually... No, wait, we saw this in the Maelstrom profile. So you search your deck or drop for a total of 2 grade 3 or 4 unit cards with different card names, and call all reveal grade 3 cards, and then you add grade 4s to your hand, but it doesn't really matter. But this card is amazing because you are a deck like Bastion that is full of utility grade 3, so you can basically just pull out whatever you want from the deck. You can, most of the time you're actually going to be pulling this gal out, and depending on what you have, you can pull one of these to be a booster, you can pull one of these to have her be a soul charge to make up for this cost, and just like put her into circulation. You mostly it's those 2 or those 3, I should say. You probably don't want to call this because you do actually have to bounce back, and it doesn't get 5k since it was called from the deck and not from the hand. But there's so much utility with this. You can theoretically even call Persona Rides out from your deck and then bounce them back to your hand to use them next turn. So even though this is a terrible deck, it can use this really good, amazing card to a very, very good effect. Alright, and next up, we do have the card that is carrying this deck on its back. The entirety of this strategy kind of relies on this card, and if you don't see it in a game, you're going to be really in struggle street. That is going to be 4 copies of Distinct Word Sense Floor. So Floor is a 6k grade 2 with the skill, which is when she's placed on rearguard from hand, you reveal top card of your deck, and if it is a unit card that is not grade 2, you call it to an open rearguard. If you do not call, the reveal card goes to the bottom of the deck. So Floor is the only grade 2 in this deck. That is because we want to see her, and every time you call her, she's going to be revealing the top card of your deck, and as long as it's not Forbidal or another copy of Floor, you get a free plus. And since the deck is built in that way anyway, you're almost always going to be getting it. So a lot of the times you call this, what you want to do is you want to call this off of the Ride Lines skill when you're on grade 2. And then you get to check the top card, and if it's grade 3, whoa, we just got a grade 3 on a grade 2 turn. And then you have 16 and 13, and then when you ride into your grade 3 Lilfa, you bounce her back to your hand, and then you call her down again, and you get another free unit from the top of your deck. 9 times out of 10, it'll call a trigger or a PG, which is actually not bad in the deck, because if you call a PG, guess what? You can swing with your Lilfa, boosting the PG with a grade 3, and then you can bounce Floor back to your hand, which you're probably always going to want to do, and you just bounce the PG back to your hand. So even when Floor misses the grade 3, it's actually not that bad because you can actually just add it back to your hand. You can add triggers for shield value, you can add PGs for being PGs, you could theoretically add grade 1s back to your hand for a little extra shield value. But this card is just carrying the entire deck on her back. and it just also helps you resist retire, removal, because they wipe your board. Oh, let me call floor, get another free board. Oh, I drew into another floor, call, get another free unit. Probably maybe not the best units, but you have a high chance of actually hitting grade 3 off of this, because most of the deck is those grade 3 cards. And once again, I think I mentioned this before, if you call Persona Right off this by accident, oh, just bounce the Persona Right to your hand. This card, I cannot stop singing the praises of it in this deck. The main issue is that it's a 6k, so it's a 6k booster, which is not great, but I think for the value that she adds to the deck and the amount that she makes the deck playable is worth losing out on that extra 4k, I guess. Alright, so as I said, that's probably it for the grade 2s. I am actually opting to play just 2 grade 1 cards. That is going to be the 2 copies of Charme. I think I also recommend this in my last deck profile. She is just a 13k. She gets plus 5k if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater. The main reason we're using her is because we want something that has shield value. Sometimes you just need like a 5k shield to block like small pokes. So she's versatile in that sense. But of course, we can't really have anything with on boost skill because all of our boosters are going to be grade 2 or grade 3s. So she effectively is just an attacker. So when you're looking for a grade 1 slot for this deck, what you want is anything that can hit, and this of course hits with without boost. There is technically another grade 1 that is supposed to be for Lilitha that has the same skill, except the condition is actually if you have 2 or more grade 3 or graders in the back row. It's honestly interchangeable, but I do like the consistency of this card, whereas the other one is active when your opponent is on grade 2, but the fact that this one is locked to grade 3 means you can't do it until your opponent rises on to grade 3. But I think like the difference between that is minimal, and I'd rather just have the consistency of always being able to hit 13 instead of having to rely on having back row, even though that is what the deck is supposed to be doing. But sometimes plans go awry, so I'd rather have this and have it always be live. Alright, so moving on to the just standard stuff. We have 4 PGs. I would opt to just play regular PGs and not Elementaria, just because you can't call Elementaria off a floor, but if you call this off a floor, you can just bounce it back to your hand. So I think the 4 is correct for this deck specifically. For the trigger lineup, we are playing 4 and 8 crit. Do note you don't actually, you can't use the grade or the Solon crits because your boosters are always grade 2 or graders. Your triggers are actually the ones that get boosted most of the time and become the attackers if you do call them off of floor. So you'd rather have 5k instead of 4k and have an effect that you can just never actually use. We have our 3 draw triggers, just because fronts are really awkward in the deck because you are swinging rear, Vanguard, and then calling in new rear, so that new rear isn't going to get the front power. So it's just better to have draw, and you do want to be drawing into pieces and PGs and shield. So next up we do have of course the 4 heals, and of course we do have just the OT. Right now I'm playing just lyrical OT. I think blue OT works pretty fine with the deck. Maybe red OT could work, just because you go Van rear, but I don't think it's that great. I think I'd rather have the extra crit in all honesty, and maybe just like add back a PG. So this is probably just going to end up being a blue OT. Alright, so since the deck has actually changed a fair amount, I figured we would just end with a quick test hand. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got. We did actually draw into the floor, which is super essential. Theoretically, we can keep this because we do, it's not super necessary, but I think we're actually just going to mull it back. I think we keep maybe 1 trigger just to guard in the early game, but everything else is going to be mulled back into the deck. And we're just going to draw 3. 1, 2, 3. Honestly, at this point, we're looking for a lot of the good utility grade 3 cards. We're looking for the Calamity Tower, we're looking for the Forbid Doll, and we're looking for our Cycle card, the Ghost Girl, in order to make things playable. But of course, we do have floor that we can consistently recycle. So this is looking pretty good. We drew into Persona Right. We have the 23k booster, and then we do also have the Calamity Tower. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's go first. We draw a card. In this hand, I think the least useful card is actually probably this. We do have still 2 copies in the deck, but it's not super necessary. It's just like an extra 10k to your column. Me writing to the grade 1s. Let's say we take 1 damage into a draw trigger, draw the card, and then start our next turn. So we would draw, probably discarding this trigger because we don't really need it right now, right into the grade 2, and then this is when we start to pop off. We call the floor and draw a card, then floor skill activates, checking the top card. That is not a grade 3 or grade 2, so we do actually get to call it, and now we have a little bit of early game aggression for essentially free. So you swing 8 and then we swing 16, check. We drew into the Ghost Girl, which is very, very good. Let's say we take 1 more damage and then we guard one of the attacks, stand and draw, going into our first grade 3 turn. So we drew into another floor, which is actually pretty good. We could theoretically get rid of this floor. We could get rid of this Ghost Girl, although we do only have 2 more left in deck, so I think I'd rather keep it. Do note that this is like Bastion, so you do need to worry a bit about your shield value. So I think in this situation, maybe we just discard this because we have 30 more copies left in deck. So we're going to be riding into the grade 3, and grade 2 skill allows us to bounce the floor back to hand. But of course, we are just going to slap it down immediately and call the top card of deck, which unfortunately in this case is going to be a heal trigger. So definitely not what we're hoping for at the moment. So a little bit of an awkward hand because we do want to be able to call some things down. What I think we're going to do is call down another floor and check the top card again. So we do actually get a Lilfa, so we're going to be able to call her to the back row rearguard circle. What I think we do in this situation is, of course, we're going to use Lilfa's skill to Soul Blast 1, and then all these things are going to get boost. So our opponent is still on grade 2, so this column is still going to be hitting. So we're going to go 10 at the Vanguard, and then of course, or not 10, that's 11, and then we're going to swing Lilitha for 19, drive check 1 into another Persona Ride, drive check 2 into a grade 1, swing at the Vanguard, and then I think we're going to go Karen Blast 1. We're going to bounce this entire column, so we get the 15k shield back to our hand, and we're going to add floor back in case we need it next turn. And then I think we're going to go ahead and call this. And another reason why this card is good, because this card will always hit over defensive. So let's say they took this damage and got a defensive, now they're at 23, we swing 23. Unfortunately, well, this is, if they're at grade 2, this will still hit because this is 13 plus 8. That's going to be 21. That's still hitting over a defensive. So unfortunately, we don't have this back to our hand quite yet, but of course we can just wait until next turn. So let's say we take another damage, get into a heal, actually heal this out, and then we need to guard. And of course, let's go ahead and just say they just swung twice, and draw a card. Now, of course, we do have the Persona Ride to get things started. Unfortunately, we can't really use floor here because floor does actually have to call to open back row rearguard circles. But in this case, I think we do actually need a booster. So what we might end up doing is, I might just call out the Persona Ride, use the skill of Lilfa to give it boost. Now, we can just go like 26. At the end of the battle, we can Soul Blast 1, bounce back the Persona Ride to hand, and then we can go 19, 29, drive check 1, drive check 2, draw trigger, draw a card. And unfortunately, we don't have another grade 3 other than our Persona Ride, so that makes things a little bit awkward. But what we can do is we just counter boss 1, add the floor and the Ghost Girl back to hand, and then just recall out the Ghost Girl. So having a lot of grade 3s is honestly what you need to be doing in the deck. As you're seeing, unfortunately, I'm not actually hitting a lot of grade 3s, but we do have a ton of cards left in hand, and somehow we have a ton of grade 3s left in deck. So we still have 26, 36 under Persona Ride, and then this is 23 or 33 if they got a trigger. So you actually make pretty decently big numbers. This wasn't a great example of what you can be doing. Normally you want to be calling this, so you're swinging 28. You want to have the Forbid also, you can call out this to be a 23k booster. I want to call this so that she makes 15 and magic numbers. But in the worst case scenario, you can still actually achieve those 4 attacks in most cases and be able to hit your opponent with a lot of pressure, especially even in the early game. All right, so that's going to do it for my Lilitha deck profile. I think the deck has a little bit of potential. There are some things that are kind of worrying about it, but you know, F tier decks have become at A tier, like with Willista, so maybe there's a chance for Lilitha to become good. She does have a lot of good points going for her, but right now I think the support is really just not there. If we do see some actually really good Lilitha support, there is a chance that she makes at least playability in the meta. So that's going to be it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do all these things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.